Hi guys, PrinceofMacedon here, doing a commentary video for Napoleon Total War multiplayer. I command the Russians, and my opponent is stcht, in command of the French. And on the minimap, I am the blue ones, and stcht is the red ones. We'll look at my army first. You can see I have no artillery. I do have a well-balanced army, except for the fact that I don't have any artillery. And we will look at my opponent's army. This is the army of stcht, and you can see he has a lot of infantry. He has no cav though. But he does have 2 units of howitzers and 1 unit of the 6-pounder foot artillery. So on this map, we are both lacking something. I'm lacking the artillery, and my opponent's lacking cav. But on a constrained map like this, I don't think missing cav is really that important. Anyways, I'm going to advance forward here, and I'm going to fight this battle once again in the manner of Suvorov, the 18th century Russian commander, one of the best in the world. But what I'm doing right now, I am going to implement some of his principles in his science of victory, and that main virtue is speed. And for him, speed was very important. He valued speed more than forming up in a straight line for battle, whereas every other commander would take their time and form their army into pretty symmetrical lines. Suvorov actually favored the attack more, and he didn't care what kind of position his troops were in. He would just attack. And in order to implement this for training, Suvorov would take his men on marches, and at random times he would order his army to attack. And on one memorable occasion, a monastery was actually the closest thing to attack, but Suvorov ordered his men to attack it anyways. So one day all these priests were praying and stuff, and then all of a sudden you have this whole Russian army coming right at them, and they were scaling the walls, and they were terrified, until Suvorov called off the little mock attack. But that's the kind of thing Suvorov did. He wanted his men ready to attack at any given moment. Anyways, I'm on my opponent's side of town right now, and I'm going to attack his buildings, which are occupied by his troops. By using my cav to disrupt his advance, that actually disrupted my opponent's plan, so now I'm able to occupy these buildings. And I occupied this particular building because that's where his right flank was coming from. And there's a lot of his troops, and most of those troops are composed of the grenadiers, so he has a lot of elite units on this wing here. But I plan to deal with them after I deal with his right flank here, or actually his left flank. And that was another thing that Suvorov did. He wanted to concentrate his forces against one side of the opponent's army, and in this case, I'm able to do this quite well, because my opponent separated his armies into two far different wings. So I took my massive Russian troops, and I'm going to smack into this particular flank here. And you can see here I've occupied the buildings on his side of town, and that really shouldn't happen, but because I was running so fast, and because I used my horses to charge like madmen into his troops, I was able to occupy those buildings that should have been his in the first place. Alright, so here comes his other flank. They are coming down my side here, and this is actually something Suvorov did on at least one battle. He actually marched his troops in a very narrow formation, and he didn't even have a flank. I mean, not the traditional flank. He told his commanders basically, flank, I don't need a flank. I'll just use my reserves to protect my flanks. So anyways, this is me. I'm taking all these buildings, and again, my opponent should be controlling these buildings. I shouldn't even be close to these buildings. But I took a chance at the beginning, and I charged. Alright, so on my left flank, my so-called left flank here, you can see my opponent is lining up his troops for battle. If you notice, the sound's kind of messed up right now, but the sound will kick in at around the 5th minute mark. But as for now, the rain that started the battle actually drowned out the musket sounds, but it will kick in eventually. What else can I talk about Suvorov? As you guys know, Suvorov, he was the one who said in the Russian army that don't ever retreat, always go forward. That was his trademark. Well, that was one of his trademarks. And on one occasion, during a parade, Suvorov marched his horse very, very, very close to an infantry formation, and the commanding officer saw this, so he ordered his men to take a step back in order to avoid Suvorov's horse. And once that officer commanded his troops to go backwards, Suvorov ordered his arrest. And you want to know why? It's because he ordered his men to retreat. And as you guys know, Suvorov did not want his men ever retreating, ever. And that was just one little story from Suvorov's colorful life. And if you want to read more about Suvorov's colorful life, there are 2 books in the English language which talk about Suvorov. One is one book I have. It's by Longworth. It's called The Art of Victory: The Life and Achievements of Field Marshal Suvorov. And the other book is more of a military history book. It's called Eagle Over the Alps, Suvorov in Italy and Switzerland, 1799, and that book is by Christopher Duffy. And I would say that Christopher Duffy is probably my favorite historian who talks about the Napoleonic period and warfare. And yeah, so if you want to read about that, then try to find those books. They're very hard to find. Alright, so here is the battle here. I've taken command of the town, and my opponent is taking all kinds of wicked crossfire from my troops. And here's my musketeers. I'm forming up to surround his dudes. Anyways, back to an earlier point. Another reason why Suvorov, why he favored the quick march, was because the artillery of the time, they had a very long range, but it took forever to reload. So by marching faster, that meant that his troops were taking less damage from the guns of the enemy. And back to a very earlier point, this is a point that I haven't mentioned in this video, but I always talk about it, and that is his favored use of the bayonet. Whenever an advancing infantry body, whenever they stop to fire, then reload, and then fire, then reload again, that means that particular body of infantry is going fairly slow. But if you look at the kind of methods that Suvorov preaches, that means his army is going right for the enemy at their bayonet. They're not stopping to fire, they're just going right at the enemy, so that means they're taking less damage. Okay, just then, I just lost 2 whole units in a building that was burning. And that was probably my biggest micro-lapse in this fight. But aside from that, that was probably the only drawback I had in this battle. But that was unnecessary, losing 2 whole units like that. Alright, here's one of my opponent's howitzers. Towards the beginning of the battle, I took out his general and his foot artillery and his other howitzer. And I did all that with 1 general unit. Alright, so you can see by all of the Russian flags in the town that my forces pretty much occupy the entire town area. There's a lot of buildings burning right now, but I am closing in. If you look on the mini-map, you can see that my opponent only has, I think, 2 more red dots. Actually, 3 more red dots on the map. And the blue ones are mine, so you can see I'm closing in on him. So, here comes my first set of troops. I'm going to confront his guard seamen and also his other troops who are protecting this pass. And if I can get past this this body of French troops protecting this pass, that means I can take out his last remaining howitzer piece. And you can see that his fusiliers are actually shooting his guard seamen. And that's another benefit of being aggressive, like in the manner of Suvorov, and that is it forces your opponent to make a lot of mistakes when you're taking the initiative like this. Because it could potentially take your opponent out of his comfort zone, and that's what Suvorov always aimed to do. Alright, here's my Jaeger. And speaking of Jaeger, this is another thing I could talk about in terms of Suvorov. Unlike other commanders of his time, Suvorov, he didn't use his Jaeger to complement his infantry body. He actually used his Jaeger, which are his skirmishers, to act in independent formations, independent of the rest of his infantry body. Alright, during all that ruckus, I took my general on a long march around the pass, and I went for a charge on his last remaining howitzer. And unfortunately, my general unit was so depleted from attacking his general and also his other artillery pieces that I didn't have enough troops to carry that charge. But that's okay, because during that charge, I momentarily silenced his artillery, but now they are firing again. But once I break that pass of French troops, then I can get right for his artillery. Alright, and here's another unit of French infantry, and I'm going to sneak around behind them towards their flank. And you can see that their morale is already low, so all I gotta do is fire a few shots at them, and they will retreat. So I'm taking some of my infantry here, and I also have a Jaeger body nearby. So we're gonna be shooting this particular unit of French troops from behind, and that's not gonna be good for them. Here's my Jaeger. And he's going to shoot at my musketeers from the other side, but I'll be shooting at him from this side. So, regardless of what my opponent does, he's going to take fire from one side or the other. And I believe he's actually going to rout my first Russian unit right there. But it doesn't matter, because at this point, the battle is pretty much over already. So, my guys are going to get ready, they're going to take aim, and now they're going to fire. And his troops are going to try to reposition themselves, but it's really too late. Those are his grenadiers, by the way. You can tell from that little grenade icon. And now they are going to run, because their morale was already low. Alright, so if you look at the mini-map, there's only one more red dot, and that is his last remaining howitzer piece. And my Jaeger are the closest ones to the action, so they are going to be the ones who deliver this finishing blow on the opponent's army. So I have my guys in the forest. They're going to take aim, and you can see I put them back in a regular formation. And I didn't really care what kind of formation they were in. I just wanted them to take some shots at that howitzer. And so you can see his flag is starting to blink, so they are routing from the battlefield, and that is the last of his troops. And if you'll notice in the results, you can see I got a badge for winning 50 battles, and I was very happy because I didn't realize that the game actually counts your battles that you win when your opponent disconnects, but I guess it does. Anyways, good game to my opponent stcht. Hope you guys enjoyed.